Everybody, Dave here, Hidden Off Grid, and welcome to another video. In this video, I want to talk about inflation, and I want to kind of go over basically about 3 different scenarios or so, and also kind of talk about why I'm not too worried about inflation for myself in early retirement. I do plan on retiring next year at age 47 with roughly, hopefully, $2 million by then. So, you know, I've had a lot of people say, oh, aren't you worried about inflation, blah, blah, blah. So let me just give you my take on inflation. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first basic scenario is basically, I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna call them the poor people, but let's just not really call them poor people, but people that barely make enough money to, you know, make ends meet or put a roof over their head, you know, keep the lights on. So let's just say they make $40,000 and they spend everything they make possible. Their take-home pay, they spend everything there that they possibly make. And obviously inflation is gonna hurt them the most. And the reason why is because, number one, they're not saving anything, they're not investing, right? And so when food goes up and prices go up, like rent goes up, utilities go up, whatever else you need to buy goes up, groceries, for example, or any other consumer product, guess what? You're paying more for that. And, you know, it's higher than that 2% that they tell you. Honestly, maybe the 2% is maybe a good rule of thumb if you average out all the years, but this year and last year, part of last year and this year, it's not been 2%. It's been way above 2% in my opinion, right? So it's gonna hurt them the most because they're spending everything they make. They're not investing, they're not saving, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in general, so if they're making $40,000 a year, guess what? Groceries gone up, rent's gone up, so they're gonna pay more for all that stuff, and they're gonna get behind unless they get a 2% or plus raise every single year by their job, which is not likely. That is not very likely at every job I've ever been over the years. I don't think I've ever got a 2% raise every single year, or minimum, right? Like in some cases it was 2%, sometimes it was 4%, but in a lot of years it was 0. So it just you know, just depends on the job, right? So anyways, scenario number 2 is, let's just say that same person, $40,000, right? But they only live off of 20, okay? So yes, inflation obviously is gonna affect them with food-wise, all the same stuff as the scenario 1, right? So food, rent, all that stuff's gonna go up, so it will affect them. Let's say they don't even get a raise, you know, all the time, same as scenario 1, but they also save, okay, and they put money in a checking account or a bank account, a savings account, okay? So pretty much that money they're saving is not doing anything for them at all. They might feel great that they're saving, but guess what? That money is basically gonna be deflated through inflation, right? So basically if let's say they have, you know, $100,000 in there, right? Well, 2%, they're gonna lose 2% of that money every single year, all right? So what I could say is there is a way around that. You could go into a high yield savings account. Although right now the high yield savings accounts don't pay anything, it's about 0.4%. But last year in 2019 as well, I think early last year and in 2019, it got up to 2% before they lowered the interest rates. So in general, the high yield savings accounts, in some cases they stay up with inflation, but right now it's not. So it, you know, when those people that actually don't spend everything but they save, they're doing better than the people that spend everything, but in general, they're not really much better off because they're actually losing money by saving that money and putting it in a checking account or a savings account. And right now, even a high yield savings account really doesn't do anything for them either. You might be able to get some CDs, certificates of deposit, that might be able to outpace inflation, but good luck with that. You can type your money as well. So what's the last scenario I would say? The last scenario is a scenario where you are, I don't even say, let's just say you're making $40,000 a year, right? That's below the median, I think, right? And you know, live on $20,000 a year. This is hypothetical, right? But you're investing about $15,000 a year, okay? Not just saving and putting a checking account, not just in a savings account, not in a high yield savings account, high yields, right? you are actually investing that money into a index fund like S&P 500, VTI, or something like VOO, which is both Vanguard funds, by the way. And that will outpace inflation, okay? So those people actually are helping themselves. What they could do is, they need to figure out how much money, how much of the spending they actually do a year and how much that inflation is. And what they could do is try to have enough investments to at least counteract that, right? And not to mention also try to get a raise from their job. But at minimum, if they spend $20,000 a year and it's a 2%, figure out what the 2% on that is, and then make sure your investments at least cover that, okay? And then I would say maybe another scenario is the boat that I'm in and why I'm not even worried about inflation at all. And I've had many people say, aren't you worried in 10 years, 20 years when your $2 million is basically worth $100,000 in buying spending power of today's money? And I'm like, not really. Because that $2 million is going to produce, let's say, $100,000 of income for me, but I'm only living on $30,000, right? And most of that $30,000, and not most, but some of that $30,000 is not going to be affected by inflation, right? There's just a lot of the spending you do that doesn't get hit by inflation, right? If I had $100,000 of income coming in and I spent all that $100,000, that could affect me. All right, so in this case here, I have $100,000 coming in and it's all invested. $2 million is all invested, and it's invested in various things that are definitely going to outpace inflation, but I'm also not spending that full amount, so I'm not getting affected by inflation as much as people would think I would. Yes, I'm going to have rent that might go up, I'm going to have food that's going to go up, but in general, inflation is definitely not going to affect me as much because I'm making a lot more money in income from my investments than them spending. In general, those investments also are going to produce most likely a lot more than inflation anyway. And that's the key there. That's the reason why you need to invest, because investing is how you become wealthy, because the Fed, when they're printing money like they are right now, and basically causing hyperinflation, then it inflates your investments too, right? The stock market goes up, right? So if you're not invested, you will fall behind. And that's the key there, right? So that, what, $30 trillion or whatever that we have in national debt, that's how they make that $30 trillion kind of just drag on and go on and go on and go on, right? 4 years ago it was 20-something trillion dollars or whatever. And it wasn't a lot of money. I mean, it was back then, don't get me wrong, but nowadays it doesn't seem like a lot, right? And that's because of inflation, right? You give it 10 years or 100 years, that $30 trillion is gonna seem like nothing. And that's because of inflation. So that's how the Fed gets away with spending and spending and spending without it really bankrupting the country, because through inflation. But you need to invest. If you don't invest, you will definitely fall behind. Inflation will affect you. You will never get ahead either. Even if you get a raise from your job every so often, or let's say every year, you get a raise from your job and it keeps up with inflation, you'll be right back where you are. You will never get ahead. So you need to invest. And you need to invest in the right type of investment that will outpace inflation, and that's like a VTI index, a VOO index, or something like that. All right, that's the overall stock market, or S&P 500 stock market. Those should outpace inflation at minimum, because if they're printing money and they're causing inflation, that should get inflated as well. So that is how the rich take advantage of inflation and why they never fall behind. So obviously they spend less than they make as well. So I hope you found something useful out of this video. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, leave a comment below. Until next time, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We'll see you next video. Thanks for watching.